have a question for you. Maybe this is something you ask yourself all the time. Or maybe you've never really thought about it before at all. Maybe this question makes you afraid. Or maybe it's an exciting question. Or does it make you so overwhelmed you'd rather just try to forget it and pretend it doesn't exist? Are you ready? The question is, what is your future? What will the rest of your life look like? Where will you live? What other people will be a part of your life? What will you do? Where will you work? Will you succeed? Or will you fail? Will you be happy? And when the day comes when your life is over, will you look back and be satisfied with all the choices you made? Did you make the most of all the opportunities you had? Or did they go to waste? Yes, these are big and difficult questions. But what if I told you the best way to answer these questions is to ask another question? What is your vocation?
A vocation, it comes from the Latin word vocare, which is to call. A vocation is a calling. A vocation is also an invitation. So invitation, calling from God.
A vocation is just living out God's will for your life. And so it's the way that God created you to become holy, to become who you were meant to be.
Because it shows that there's purpose. I'm here for a reason. I've got a purpose to my life.
God calling us back to himself. And so the vocation is the road we take to get to heaven, to get to God the Father.
So if it's to the married life, to whom? If it's to the celibate life as a religious brother or sister, is it in a community? Is it to the priesthood?
What are you called to do? What is God calling you to do? And figuring out if you're brave enough to accept it, if you can trust him enough. But a vocation is what God is asking of you and saying yes.
Now, you might ask yourself, where am I called? I think just asking the question is a beautiful start to a life of adventure.
Imagine what it would be like to have a loving spouse for the rest of your life to raise a family. Imagine that. But similarly, be open to imagining God calling us to a vocation of priesthood.
And you might feel drawn to one of these things. And that's okay, that's beautiful. Just because you're drawn to it now does not mean that it's necessarily a vocation, but it's an invitation to explore it.
If suddenly there's like, hey, that really captures my imagination, or wow, I need to find out more, because that could be God saying, yep, come closer with that one.
When I was discerning in the beginning, I was very anxious to know the answer because I didn't want to make a mistake. Jesus said to fall in love with me. So I took that time to fall in love with Jesus and to say, I just want to love you. And more I realized that his will is 100% aligned with my happiness.
We started off with a really great friendship, and he apparently liked me. I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue.
And then I asked you out on the date, but I still had this pull to the priesthood. And so I kind of freaked out. I very much distinctly remember hearing God's voice of take her out on another date and I will give you answers. I was like, okay. And well, here we are.
It began with the fascination of looking at a priest that was in my life at the time. I said to myself in second grade, I'd like to be like him.
I didn't know exactly what God wanted for me in my life, and I would stress myself out about it. When you're young, you feel like you have to have everything figured out, or else your life will just slip right by you.
And there was even a time when I felt like we had to seriously pray about our relationship and if we were really meant to be together, because I didn't want to disappoint God. I didn't want to do the wrong thing.
My responsibility is just doing the best that I can with what I'm given and do my best to hear his voice, and everything will fall into place.
Our main purpose at the current moment, when I gave birth to her, I felt like my purpose was fulfilled.
When you're in middle school, you don't have to make the decision. You just need to start thinking about it and having that conversation with God.
You got freedom to choose where you think you are called. Do this in prayer.
Don't be afraid to ask the questions. There's a fantastic road ahead for you that God knows and he wants you to know. All you have to do is ask.
I always tell Joe, I'm so happy that I get to do life with you. We get to go through the happy, joyful times together and the hard times together, and just knowing that he's gonna be there with me.
And so I know joy, and I'm able to be free to give love in ways I never even thought was possible.
It's freeing and joyful. I'm living the life I'm supposed to live. Well, what if I weren't a priest? my brain explodes. It's like, well, I can't even imagine that. And I know this is the path that God lays out for me to come home to heaven when the end of this life is fulfilled.
I would say you are made for greatness. So get excited about that greatness to which you are called, a state of life that God is calling you to, because it's beautiful.
God will take care of you in your vocation. As long as you're making the effort, as long as you're striving and to love God and to listen to what He wants for you, that's all that He asks for. And then He'll take the rest.